Throughout history, there have been many different presidents of the United States whose lives were cut short through assassination. The most infamous was JFK, but in the century before, Abraham Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth inside of a theatre in Washington. But another president who was assassinated was James Garfield, who served as the President of America for around 6 months until he was shot by Charles J Guiteau. Guiteau was then later executed for his crime, after Garfield died 2 months after from his infections related to his wounds. But what is the story of his execution? Join us today as we look at the execution of the man that shot President Garfield, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Charles J Guiteau, as a young man, inherited a large sum of money from his grandfather, and then he attended the University of Michigan, but he failed his entrance exams. He later joined a religious group, but there was a group marriage policy in the group, and Guiteau was rejected during his 5 years there. He left the community twice, and then he began to work as a clerk at a Chicago law firm. He was not a successful lawyer, and he only argued one case in court, and he made most of his money as a bill collector. He married a librarian, who later said he was involved in dishonest activity, as he would regularly take large amounts from his collections, and would rarely give any money to his clients. The group moved to New York, and then he took an interest in politics as a Democrat to begin with. Guiteau was physically violent to his wife, and she wanted a divorce, and he turned his back on his religion. His father would claim that his son was possessed by Satan, and he would spend a large part of the 1880s in Boston, where he was accused of theft. But he remained interested in politics, and the winner of the next election was James A. Garfield, who became the president. During the early parts of Garfield's presidency, which began in March 1881, Guiteau was living in Washington, and he was rather poor, and he was forced to live between rooming houses without paying for his lodgings and his meals. He had to walk the snowy cold city without a coat or boots, and he spent a large part of his days in hotel lobbies, reading newspapers, and keeping track about President Garfield and his cabinet. He would become obsessed with Garfield, and he even approached the Secretary of State at one time, and he asked about an appointment to a position of government, showing how he was losing touch of reality. Guiteau considered himself a Republican and a stalwart at this time, and he convinced himself that his work for the party was important to Garfield's election. He later convinced himself that Garfield was going to destroy the party, and after his encounter with the Secretary of State, he became determined to take out Garfield and to make the Vice President Chester A. Arthur the next president. He believed that the president would be too strong to be killed with a knife, and said, "Garfield would have crushed the life out of me with a single blow of the fist," and he then came up with a plan to shoot the president. He felt that Garfield needed to be killed, and he borrowed £15 from a relative to buy a revolver. He thought he needed a large caliber weapon, and he settled on a Webley caliber revolver. He could not afford the extra $1 for an ivory grip, but the store owner let him off. He spent a few weeks practicing, and then the recoil from the weapon was so severe that he was knocked over the first time he fired it. During one incident, Guiteau began to shadow President Garfield to the Baltimore and Potomac railway station, as he was saying goodbye to his wife as she was off to a beach resort. But his wife was in poor health, and Guiteau changed his plans, as he allegedly did not want to upset his wife. However, on the 2nd of July 1881, he would settle on his idea. He was waiting that day on the station, getting his shoes shined and pacing. President Garfield entered the station, and he was looking forward to a holiday with his wife. However, Charles Guiteau stepped forward, and he then shot Garfield twice from behind. The second shot pierced the first lumbar vertebra, but missed the spinal cord. Guiteau surrendered himself and said, "I am a stalwart of the stalwarts. Arthur is president now." But initially the gunshots did not kill the president. But after a battle with infection, and the fact his doctors were poking the wound with unwashed hands and dirty equipment, died on the 19th of September, almost 3 months after being shot. Many believe that he would have been saved if clean equipment was used, but the bullet wound had caused a serious infection and blood poisoning. However, once Garfield was dead, the government officially charged the assassin with murder. He had previously been accused of attempted murder, and he pleaded not guilty. His trial occurred in Washington, and it was one of the first high-profile cases in America where temporary insanity was considered. Guiteau insisted he had been legally insane at the time of the shooting, and he was not really medically insane. A defense witness said, "He is not only now insane, but that he was never anything else." But a prosecuting witness said, "He's no more insane than I am. There's nothing of the mad about Guiteau. He's a cool, calculating blackguard, a polished ruffian, who has gradually prepared himself to pose in this way before the world. He was a deadbeat pure and simple. Finally he got tired of the monotony of deadbeating. He wanted excitement of some other kind and notoriety, and he got it." His bizarre behaviour attracted the media, and at trial he would insult and curse at the judge and the witnesses. He even gave his testimony in epic poetry, and asked for legal advice from random spectators via notes which were passed. He appealed to the new president to set him free, saying that, "The doctors killed Garfield, I just shot him." However, he was sentenced to death after being found guilty, and he would fire one last insult at the jury. He appealed his conviction, but this was rejected. On the 30th of June 1882 in the District of Columbia, Charles J Guiteau was brought to his execution. He was led to the gallows, and he smiled and waved at the spectators and reporters. On the way to the gallows he danced and delivered a last dying prayer, and he said that God did inspire the act for which I am now being murdered. He said, "This government and nation by this act will incur the eternal enmity. Thy divine law of retribution will strike this nation and my murderers." He called the new president a coward, whose ingratitude to the man that made him and saved his party and land from overthrow has no parallel in history. Guiteau signalled he was ready to die after dropping the paper containing a poem he had written. After this was finished, whilst he was stood on the gallows, a black hood was placed over his smiling head, and then seconds later he was shuffled over the trapdoor, which was then sprung, and instantly he fell through, and the rope broke his neck with the fall. Guiteau's remains were not returned to his family, and he was autopsied and buried in the corner of the prison yard. Pieces of the hanging rope were sold as souvenirs, and rumours began to emerge that the prison guards were going to dig up his corpse and to pass this on to grave robbers. Charles J Guiteau was a man who assassinated an American president, and the event that made him infamous is one which is largely forgotten in history. His evil act has been overshadowed by those such as Lee Harvey Oswald or by John Wilkes Booth, who also took the lives of high-profile presidents. He was a man who was seen as crazy during his trial, and his trial captivated a nation, but inside of a prison in Washington, he was executed for his act of killing a president, and until the very end, he appeared delusional, defiant, and downright indignant. His story is certainly one which is a captivating one. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.